why can judging others sometimes be a good thing? Sometimes even a necessary thing. In today's society, we really reject this idea of judging others. And I firmly believe that judging others is really a waste of time. It really serves no purpose other than what I'm about to speak. And it may not be exactly what you expect. Because you see, when we judge others, this provides us extremely valuable insight into our own nature of who we are. And it threatens and questions who we believe ourselves to be. Because every judgment that we project onto another person is really just a reflection of ourselves. Because in this human form, in this limited form, there is so much information at play that we can never possibly understand and get a full picture of the truth. And so we have to realize that we aren't really experiencing reality as it is. We aren't experiencing other people as they are. We are experiencing ourselves, and we are living in this projected reality from the mind. And so you see, if I have a strong negative judgment towards somebody else, this is likely a trigger that reveals some kind of negative trait that I do not want to see in myself. And so if I project onto somebody else and judge them heavily for being lazy, for instance, then it is likely that I have repressed the part of myself that is lazy. I have rejected this part and have deemed it unacceptable. But what happens is that this part of ourselves, it doesn't just go away. What happens is that these characteristics begin building momentum and living on in our unconscious, what they call the shadow. And when we inquire into our negative judgments of others, we can often find that we are not actually talking about them, but we're talking about ourselves. There may be some part of us that is lazy, but it's so far out of our awareness that we just don't see it. And so to avoid facing the truth, the ego projects it onto another person to create this kind of space between that negative trait and ourselves. And we live completely unconscious of this. And what can happen is that if we have too many parts of ourselves that are rejected, that we deem unacceptable, then these things can come back to haunt us, to sabotage our life, to cause problems. Because if you think about it, if I rejected you and said you are unacceptable for who you are ugly, how would that make you feel? Would that not make you feel hurt? Maybe even resentful? There might be a part of you that would want to plot your revenge against me. Because I think inside all of us is this deep desire to be heard. And these pieces of ourselves that we've rejected begin to form this kind of Frankenstein monster that lurks in the shadows. And just like you or me, this complex, this kind of hidden personality, it wants to be heard. It wants to be accepted. And it will not be denied. And so we have no choice but to begin recognizing these dark and rejected aspects of ourselves. Because if we don't, we are leaving potential on the table. We might not be able to become the greatest version of ourselves because, in a way, we are incomplete. Because if you reject any one of the parts, you also reject the whole, because the parts in the whole thing cannot be separated. They are interdependent. And you see this a lot in Christianity. This is kind of perhaps accidental or not, but it has created this kind of neurosis in a lot of people where we identify so heavily in being a good person. I want to do the right thing. And so when we see others, we reject them when they're selfish or when they're mean or when they're judgmental. But you see, the problem with this is that we may believe ourselves to be a good person and identify with this kind of moral righteousness. But often what happens is that we kind of ignore the parts of ourselves that like the darkness, that kind of like the evil, that like the drama and the tension and the problems. And you might say, I don't like any of those things, but we are all human. We are not meant to be this kind of perfect, ideal version of ourselves. And the more we kind of hold on so heavily to this identity, so long as we are so attached to it, then we are ignoring parts of ourselves that will not be denied. Better to accept your darkness, to see it, not to embrace it, and not to reject it. And I like to say all of the evil in the world and most of the suffering that is created is not created by the devil, but it is created in the denial of the devil and in worshiping the devil. And so don't allow yourself to fall into this trap of moral righteousness, because chances are you're ignoring all the ways in which you are not that. Because what happens is that when we have a solid set identity that we believe in, our mind only focuses on that evidence which reaffirms this identity, and it ignores anything that contradicts it. And you see this again a lot with religious people, is that they have such a strong religious belief, and anything that comes contrary to that religious belief, they immediately deny, or they say it is satanic and evil. They say other religions are false, but my religion is true. But again, we are rejecting the whole truth by rejecting different parts of it. And so if you are really heavily identified with any kind of belief, whether it's religious, whether it's political, whether it's about the nature of reality, we by default begin ignoring other valuable pieces of information that we could use to become a greater version of ourselves. Like I said, we are leaving potential on the table. And so the key to what you may call integrating the shadow is by recognizing the ways that we judge others, by recognizing our triggers, what gets us really emotional, what do we hate about other people. And this often leads us to clues about what we hate in ourselves. And so we can begin healing by accepting these parts of ourselves, even by loving them, because all the different parts of ourselves come together to make who we are. And so long as we are rejecting parts of ourselves, we can never feel complete. And so what might happen is that we may continue to get ourselves into certain kind of situations, certain problems, certain situations that cause us a lot of suffering. But these situations are typically opportunities for us to recognize the parts of ourselves that we've rejected and to grow, to become more aware of ourselves. And you may come to realize this through the recognition of certain patterns in our lives. So I like to say, if something happens to you once, then it's just, something that's happened. If something happens to you twice, then maybe it's just a coincidence. But if something happens to you 3 times or more, then we must be creating that situation in our life. We are the source of that problem. And so if we wish to overcome that problem, we must learn the lesson it is trying to teach us. Whether it's addiction, whether it's other kinds of self-destructive behavior, getting in the wrong kinds of relationships, arguing with the same person over the same things over and over again. We get too focused on the emotions of the moment, and we forget to take a step back and really ask ourselves, why is this happening? What am I doing that is contributing to the suffering of this situation or contributing to the problem? But what do most people do? They push the blame onto the other person for not being the way that we think they should be. When people don't rise up to our expectations, we get disappointed. But whose fault is that? Because like I said before, we don't really know anybody because we can only see our own projections of others, because we don't know what it's like to be in their shoes. We don't have all the information, and so we're making judgments and beliefs off of incomplete information. And yet we believe these things to be facts, because there could be truth within our beliefs, but that doesn't mean it's the whole truth. And that is why Socrates was one of the wisest men, because he said, "All that I know is that I know nothing." So don't try so hard to convince yourself that you know something, that you know this or that I know this person is it's just the way they are. Life is just the way it is. These things happen to me because, for whatever reason, because I'm not good enough, because bad things always happen to me. These are just projections from the mind, and we choose to believe them. And then our mind seeks out evidence to reaffirm these beliefs. And so we can be comfortable. Our ego says, okay, I'm right. But these are just mind games that we play with ourselves. What do we know about anything? And so once you accept the fact that we are pretty much ignorant of all things, we can stop judging so much, stop projecting our inner realities onto the external world, and we can begin seeing life more clearly. Our reality isn't always so filtered through these temporary emotional states, and it is often in these emotional states in which we do the most harm to ourselves and to others in life. Because again, we are acting on false information, on false understanding. So why are you trying to hold on so hard, so much to this story that's not serving you, that's causing you suffering? Your beliefs about life being just the way it is, or other people, I bet you didn't know that you can actually change other people's behavior by changing your perception of them. Because you see, what happens is that when we have come to a conclusion about how somebody else is, then every time we interact with that person, we are projecting that identity, that made up belief about that person, and we reinforce that identity. in every word that we speak, in every action that we take around that person. And it's not always a bad thing, but it's usually the negative projections and beliefs that get us into trouble. And sometimes judging others isn't always a projection of ourselves. Sometimes in the moment, certain things call for certain kinds of actions, appropriate responses to certain situations. Sometimes judging another person is the right thing to do, but you have to have the wisdom to discern this in the moment for yourself. And so I like to say that we all have so many shortcomings ourselves. Why waste your time focusing on the shortcomings of others? In the Bible it says, don't talk about the splinter in your brother's eye when you have a mote in your own eye, or a big log in your own eye that's blinding you from the truth. Because we're all fallible. We're all only human. And we have so much of a mess to deal with our own selves that why would you ever deal with the messes of other people? It's just too much to deal with. And so we already know that we can't really force change upon another person. All we can do is change ourselves. And what you will find is that if we can change ourselves and heal ourselves, then we take this new, refreshed, healing energy to the interactions we have with other people, and we give them the opportunity to change. But so long as you are projecting your own mind games onto other people, you keep them a slave to your projection, and you create suffering in their lives, and you create suffering in your own life. Because I think often we forget that reality is first created in our minds. We like to believe that we're rational, that we observe the facts of reality. And to a degree, perhaps we can do this. But I personally am not so interested in relying on the judgment of my five senses, because they often lie to us, because our mind often lies to us. Instead, I choose to trust my intuition, to simply be in the moment and allow things to flow as they are. And then spontaneously, I act in ways that I trust are the appropriate responses to the world around me. Because I'm not relying on myself. I'm relying on the eternal guidance system that is within us all. That eternal compass. And if I make a mistake, I don't view it as a mistake, because whatever behavior that was engaged in allows for the recognition and the realization and the awareness of parts of myself that I may have been unconscious of. And so if you make a mistake, don't sit so long with the guilt and the shame. By all means, use these emotional motivators as they arise, but don't sit and resonate with them. Learn the lesson that is trying to be taught, because that is the whole point. There is nothing that happens to us in this life that is not trying to teach us something. Every moment is an opportunity to learn. And yet we are so distracted by our emotions and the shiny objects in the world around us that we just don't pay attention. And so practice meditation, create some space in your mind. Allow thoughts and emotions to be as they are without resisting them. Accept them, especially the difficult emotions, the ugly thoughts, the negative parts of ourselves that we really don't want to look at. But if we have the courage to look into the darkness of ourselves, what we will find is the key to our greatest development, the key to becoming whole again. And it's definitely not easy, but I like to say, once you accept the fact that life is the hardest thing you're going to have to do, well, then maybe you can embrace the struggle a bit. Understand that, well, it's supposed to be this way. It's not supposed to be easy. Because if it was easy, there would be no growth. I think one of the most important things we can do in this life is to realize ourselves, to have self-awareness, to know ourselves. And I don't believe that there is many other things that are more exciting and worthwhile and meaningful than this. Because the more we know ourselves, the more we recognize our patterns of thoughts and emotions and triggers and the way we are, we can begin healing the parts of ourselves that need our attention. And the more we can heal ourselves, the more we can act as a guiding light for the ones around us, for the ones we love. But so long as we remain wounded by choosing not to look into the darkness, well, then we allow the world around us to also remain in darkness. When we suffer, we create suffering. Hurt people hurt people. And so there is nothing more important you can do than to heal yourself, to heal your trauma. And one of the first steps to doing this is recognizing the parts of yourself that you've rejected as unacceptable. And we can do this by our awareness of the way we judge other people.